Good morning, and on behalf of Mobility Ways, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this latest Thought Leadership webinar. For those new to Mobility Ways, we are a leader in transport decarbonisation and the leader in tackling commuting emissions with a focus on advancing sustainable travel at strategic employment sites in the UK and beyond. The aim of these regular sessions is to support learning and invite collaboration on advancing place-based sustainable travel. Today, we are returning to the topic of transport strategy with a dive into the UK's Department for Transport's Data Action Plan. The Transport Data Action Plan was recently published alongside Better Connected, the Integrated Transport Strategy. Today is an opportunity to hear from the DfT about plans for accelerating innovation in data and, importantly, data sharing between organisations, transport modes and systems. I'm pretty sure all joining today would agree that better data is essential to delivering a more integrated and operationally efficient transport system. Mobility Ways fully supports a transport system where getting more people to use their own car less is driven by data on the actual trips being made. Data must then also be the foundation from which travel behaviour change is nurtured through the provision of quality information on realistic transport choices, targeted delivery of incentives, and ongoing monitoring to track progress against the objectives of local transport plans with regards to tackling single occupancy vehicle travel and reducing private vehicle trips. So today, I'm delighted that Ben Kelly, Data Strategy Lead at the DfT, joins us today to provide context and detail on what we need to know about the Transport Data Action Plan. Welcome, Ben. We have an hour for this webinar and are aiming for sufficient time for questions, so please add these as they come to you, along with general comments via the Q&A function. Comments and questions that remain once we hit the hour will be followed up over email. A reminder also that this session is being recorded. A link will be circulated after, so you'll be able to watch it back and share with colleagues. Okay, so enough from me. Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you so much to you and also to the team at Mobility Ways for inviting me to come and discuss data and more specifically the Transport Data Action Plan with you all today. So yes, I'm Ben Kelly. I'm the Data Strategy Lead at the Department for Transport. I'm part of the Data Transformation team here at DfT, which is a team whose goal is to improve how the entire transport system uses, shares and benefits from data. So I'm going to talk to you today about our Transport Data Action Plan, which we published back in March and is our delivery plan for better data in the transport system. So you go to the next slide, please. So to start with, why are we so focused on data as a tool for improvements in transport? I'm sure this won't be a controversial opinion for those who are attending this call, but we see data as one of the critical drivers of an improving and more integrated transport system. So why is this the case? So firstly, perhaps an obvious point, but transport systems are a very measurable entity compared to some other policy areas we have in government. That's very good news. We know a lot about the system. We know a lot about how the system functions. It's also a system that's fundamentally underpinned by this data to function effectively. So if you think about a set of sort of overlapping modes of transport and how individuals navigate it, it's a big, highly complex system, all underpinned by different data sets, data sharing, and data flows. And increasingly, there's a huge expectation from citizens and customers to have timely, accurate, up-to-date data on how this all works, particularly if there is disruption or if things are not quite going to plan. People want to know how to have up-to-date information that they can use to change their journey. If people have particular accessibility needs as well, that's something in which people want to have more information about knowing how they are able to travel most effectively. And there's also, I think the other sort of important element here is that the policy decisions that we need to make at DfT, but also the sort of strategy delivery decisions that you all on this call make with regards to transport will also rely on accurate data, accurate analysis, good modeling of this transport system, understanding how to improve things. So if you go to the next slide. So what happens if we address some of these parts of the system? Well, there's going to be some really clear benefits that we can gain from better, more effective data use. We think that better data across transport will enable better customer experiences. So that's what I mentioned just now about people being able to better plan their journeys, particularly for sort of multimodal journeys. So if you're taking a trip that starts with a walk and then gets a bus and then gets a train, if you have better information about the options that you need to take, that means that you're going to be more effective at planning your journey, but it's also you're going to be able to make it more cost effective for yourself. And particularly the case, as I said, about for accessibility, where people need more information in order to know how and where they can travel. It's also going to bring about sector modernization, so being able to maintain and improve infrastructure and operations through better access to data and high quality data. But it's also about enabling new technologies as well. A lot of sort of sector modernization is going to come through sort of innovative uses of data, so AI being the obvious one. But it relies on good data flows in order to make that work. And then the final sort of benefit here is around better decision making for everyone. So if that's policy, strategy, delivery decisions, we're able to do that better with better evidence, whether or not that's someone making a decision close to the ground, or someone making a sort of high up strategy decision. And we also see data is really important for another DfT priority, which is transport integration. So the data action plan was published at the same time as Better Connected, which Graham mentioned, which is the department's strategy for how to enable more integrated travel. A lot of the new capabilities that strategy wants to enable, such as integrated ticketing, they rely on shared, interoperable, high-quality data flowing across organizations with greater access for users. So data really underpins that wider strategy that we're contributing to in the department. So if you go to the next slide. So that's the big picture. More sort of specific questions. Why do we need a data action plan? Well, in part, we needed a bit more strategic direction. So we had the 2023 transport data strategy, which set out sort of high-end themes and how we're going to approach things. But things have moved on a little bit since then, particularly on the technology front. So the huge amounts of change between 2023 and 2026 in terms of AI has been significant. But what AI really has done is clarify the need for good, structured, labeled data, and increased the need for our data pipelines to be in good shape. Also, with a change of government back in 2024, there's been a renewed focus on driving growth, particularly through transport, and I think a renewed sort of interest in data as a driver for economic change. And I already mentioned it above. There's this increasing focus on integration. So, data is going to enable a lot of the outcomes that we want in terms of a transport system that's more integrated, more multimodal, that relies on data flowing across these different silos and different modes. Okay, so on the next slide, we talk a little bit about our approach to writing this document. So we engaged really widely with the sector while writing this strategy. So we did a lot of work to try and understand what the barriers and blockers currently are to data sharing, to using data, to relying on data for decision making. So we built on a lot of the engagement that was carried out while the team that wrote Better Connected was developing that. So they held a bunch of people's panels and regional roadshows, and we reviewed lots of the sort of data-specific outputs from that. We also did a lot of our own bespoke engagement with teams in the data world, and hopefully some of those who are on this call will have been part of some of those efforts. But it's meant that we're really confident that the vision and the actions that we set out in the data action plan are reflective of the current state of play in terms of transport data. So if you go to the next slide. Right. So what is actually in the DAP? Well, the first thing it does is it sets out a vision for how we're going to use transport data, and then it sets out more specific actions for how we're going to get there. So the action plan is not just sort of names that, it's focused on taking sort of strategic decisions into specific actions that we're going to, that we hope are going to have an impact on the wider system. So the vision bit first. So the very simple version of this is that we want people to have the information they need to make the journeys they choose, and for organizations to have the data to improve the services they deliver. So it's a very sort of very simple but very focused ambition here. The idea is that the 11 actions that we have in the data action plan will lead to a better use of data across the sector, and this in itself will lead to a better transport system for everyone. So if you go to the next slide, this leads us on to the actual actions of the data action plan. So the actions fall into 5 broader themes. These themes are the same themes that we used in the 2023 strategy. So we have a theme around sharing, discoverability, and access. So how do we ensure that data is more readily available across organizations and across the sector, both internally and externally? And how do we make sure that it's being shared more than it currently is? We have a theme around data standards and quality. So this is around how do we ensure that data is interoperable across the sector? How do we make sure that data is consistent in terms of formatting and structure? How do we know that data is of sufficient quality to be used once it's shared? So it's really focusing on sort of the actual quality of the data itself rather than how often it's being used. Then we have a theme around skills, culture, and leadership. So this is all about changing how we see data within the transport sector, how we encourage leadership and decision makers to embrace data first, how we know that we have the right skills in place to enable some of these data-driven decisions that we want to take. It's a sort of encouraging a more sort of positive approach to using data across the organizations. Then we have a theme around user needs and communication. So what this theme is about is really about ensuring that our use of data reflects the real world needs of people and organizations. So it's basically a call to action for us to keep customers and organizations at the heart of our use of data, and making sure that it reflects what people actually want from the system. Then finally, we have a theme around governance, protection, ethics, which is all about ensuring that our data use is in line with the obligations that we have in terms of legal obligations, ethical obligations, and regulatory obligations. So if you go to the next slide, then we can go into more detail of what the actual actions are. So 11 actions grouped into these individual themes. So I'll go through them each in detail, and we'll say a little bit more about each one. So within the sharing, discoverability, and access theme, we have the first action, which is around championing more data sharing, removing unnecessary barriers and enabling responsible access to data. Really, really important action. We're looking at all different ways across the system that we can look into how we encourage more data to be just shared across organizations, and make things more accessible in that sense. We also have an action to promote APIs, so application programming interfaces, as the expected method of sharing transport data. Often we have a lot of data sets that we hold as DfT, but also that are in the wider sector that are shared sort of once in a while, often through Excels or sort of individual data jobs. We want to promote APIs as where appropriate, the best way to share data to make things more efficient. We want to encourage organizations to do the same. So action 11, you'll notice is slightly out of order. I won't go into details as to why this is, but it was due to this slightly out of sync publication with Better Connected. But basically, this is a commitment to develop a transport data marketplace. So this is a sort of a single place where data sets can be posted, shared, accessed, and it's a sort of a tool that can enable that greater data sharing that we're looking for. So in the data standards and quality theme, 2 main themes here. The first one is working towards a consistent view of data standards for the transport system to use. So we're aware that there's huge amount of activity going on in terms of data standards within transport. Lots of really, really good work to make standards across different modes of transport. What there isn't always is a coherent picture about what data standards can be applied for different modes, and where often there's a sort of a lack of understanding of what data standards are there and what data standards should be used for different ways. So we're going to do some work to make sure that we cohere that picture, make sure that there is a really consistent picture of data standards across transport. Because if there are more consistent standards about data sets, it means it's more easy to share them and more easy to use them across different projects and across different organizations. We're also going to be looking into exploring how we could use technology to improve data quality. So this is part of a wider push to make sure that data quality is as high as possible. but we're looking into different ways that we could use data, particularly AI, to improve data quality. But it's definitely on the sort of the explore side rather than the we will definitely do this. So that's data standards and quality. Under the skills, culture, and leadership theme, we have two actions. So the first one is around creating opportunities for organizations to learn from each other. It's basically about how the department can be a sort of convener for best practice and for good ideas across the sector. We're very aware that it doesn't matter how much encouragement you do of data sharing or creation of tools in which data can be shared. We need organizations to be aware of it. We need organizations to learn from each other and to share good ideas. And we also want to embed a positive culture around data in transport, which is really key to making sure that all of these are continue to be prioritized. So then in the theme of user needs and communication, we have two actions here. The first is around ensuring data and transport represents the needs of all people who travel. So it's really about representation in the sense of we're gathering as much data as we can. We know that different people require different needs when they travel, making sure that those are reflected in the data, and we're not letting sort of biases around our data creep into policy decisions. But there's also a commitment here to continue to engage with transport experts and to stakeholders across the sector to make sure that all of this work reflects real world needs as well. And then finally, under governance, protection, and ethics, we have two actions. So the first one is to really maximize the value of data to support government missions. That's making sure that we keep focused in our minds that as we gather and use and share more data, we make sure that they're contributing to those wider priorities of increasing growth and enabling a better transport system. And then finally, this last action I think is very relevant to everyone here. We want to make sure that organizations are helped as much as possible to apply the relevant guidance and frameworks that we're setting out within the plan. Across all of these different 11 actions, there's a bunch of sort of sub-commitments to each one, and a huge number of them are about setting out guidance or setting out further direction. We want to make sure that everyone who's using data within the transport system knows what they need to do, knows what direction they're given, and that applies to all of these different actions, whether or not it's data standards or it's data sharing. We know that the more that we can do to give good information about what is best practice, what is the good standard to use, then that's the more effective all these other actions will be. So if you go to the next slide. Those are all of the actions. I won't go into huge amounts of details on this, but this is our sort of internal logic model for the DAP. So we've done a huge amount of thinking about how all of these different themes, the way that we're breaking down the core problem, lead through to all of these actions, and how these actions will feed through to the outcomes and the impacts that we expect to have on the transport system. So all those impacts on the right-hand side around having a transport system that's more cost-effective, that's more sustainable, that's enabling faster, more efficient journeys. We've thought a great deal about how each individual action will feed through into each of the different impacts. So there's a more detailed version of that I can share if people are interested. But just to sort of reiterate that we've really done the thinking about how we expect these actions to have a really positive effect. If you go to the next slide. So I've done a lot of talking. What does the DAP actually mean for you in your organizations? So we hope that the main impact for you will be that you have access to an improved data ecosystem within transport and are able to innovate and benefit from that. So, we hope that there's going to be wider availability of data for transport. If we get data sharing right, there's going to be a lot more data accessible and usable for everyone. So that's more data for you to take and innovate and build new cool things with. If we get data quality right, our data will be more trustworthy and more worthy of use. That's just a benefit for everyone, no matter how you use data, wherever you are in the system. As I said, there's going to be more opportunities for sort of cross-sectoral learning and sharing, more opportunities to share and celebrate good work that's going on in the sector, and overall more championing of data from DfT and from seniors on our side to make sure that this continues to be a real priority. So then with more data available, that means that there are going to be more opportunities for you all to deliver data-driven solutions, more opportunities to innovate in this space. We hope that if we get the outputs from the DAP right, then we'll sort of create an enabling system that allows people to innovate, to do things differently, to try new things, and to develop sort of new and interesting solutions. And everyone on this call can play a huge role in that. And finally, sort of related to Action 10 in the plan, there's going to be more guidance, clearer guidance, more direction from us in terms of what good looks like. This isn't going to be a case of us telling everyone what to do. It's about sort of providing more examples of what good looks like in particular areas, what good looks like in the sector, and how you can build on that in your own work. So hopefully you'll be more aware of how you can make the most of data in this space as well. So if you go to the next slide. Yes, so the other interesting thing we did from a sort of a user perspective in the action plan is we came out with this question map where we set out the expected questions that we thought those working with data in transport would most likely have. Is also what we heard a lot from people when we were sort of doing the research for the plan. And we then mapped those questions down to the individual actions that we think are most likely to be relevant. So this is, I think, a way of keeping us honest in terms of making sure that we think that the actions are going to actually solve some of the problems that people have. I realize that the text is a little small on the slide, but if you go to the actual data action plan itself, you'll be able to see this diagram in a lot more detail, and hopefully, if you've got a particular question around how to use data in your organization, hopefully you'll see the question in that matrix and then be able to map it to one of the actions that we think are going to provide a solution. So if you go to the next slide. So we published the action plan back in March, which leads to the obvious question about what comes next. We've definitely moved from sort of publishing mode into delivery mode, starting with some of the higher priority actions within the plan. So we've done a huge amount of work internally at DfT in terms of starting to push some of these actions through into delivery. So we're beginning a discovery into where the gaps are in terms of data standards and what actions that we could take in order to bring those more coherently together. We are undertaking a project into looking at what further data we need in terms for accessibility. So what are further data that we need and how can we improve data that's accessible to teams in that space? We're doing a huge amount on governance, so thinking about how data projects, and this is sort of an internal thing to DfT, but how do we make sure that data projects are pushed forward and how can we encourage more data sharing within the organization? But also through that, thinking a lot about that guidance piece that I said about how we're going to say more about what good looks like from a data perspective. I already mentioned APIs. We're starting a project fairly recently about how we could look to share some of the DfT datasets that we hold using APIs. So really interesting work going on in that. And then we're looking at all of the different ways. So that first action in the plan around how can we encourage data sharing. We are currently looking into that from multiple perspectives. So how can we best encourage that? How can we best use the tools that we have available to sort of make sure that good data sharing principles are followed as part of some of the contracts that we look at and how we do things within the department. And then we're also doing a huge amount of work on sort of similar projects across government. So projects, we're having an interesting look at smart data and looking at the value of data, which is a sort of a co-project with Department for Business and Trade, and we're also really linked in closely to the work that DCIT are doing on the National Data Library, because which is a project to set out a sort of an overarching set of databases of interesting public data sets that government holds. Obviously, that's super aligned to what we want to try and do with the transport data marketplace. So we're linked in really closely with them. So there's already a huge amount of activity underway. and we're monitoring very closely how we're going to be delivering against the action plan. So if you go to the next slide. So that is it from me in terms of talking about the action plan. I know I mentioned earlier that we did a huge amount of engagement while writing it, but we are still really keen to hear from as many people as possible about their reactions to the plan, where they think it solves particular problems or where there are problems that it doesn't quite solve. What are the particular barriers to achieving some of the actions? How could we do things better? We want to know what the sort of the problems that you all face and how we can potentially help through our work that's going on the plan. And then we want to really use this document as a catalyst for change. We want to be able to share your work, link you up with others who are doing similar work in this space, and basically use the resources that we create to help you solve your problem. So, please do get in touch with us. You can email us with that email that's on the page there, so dataactionplan@dft.gov.uk if you want to get in touch with us. You can also read the DAP. I would well recommend reading it in full. It's not one of those huge, gigantic government strategies that is sort of 200 pages long. It's a sort of relatively slim volume and quite readable, I think, so definitely worth a look. You can find that by just searching the Transport Data Action Plan and going to the gov.uk link. We also have a website, transportdataactionplan.org.uk, that goes into a little bit more detail about some of the actions, and it's also going to be a place where we share lots of resources and some of the guidance as well. So definitely worth keeping that one bookmarked. So yes, thank you so much everyone for listening to me talk about the action plan. I'd be really keen to hear people's reflections and any questions that anyone might have about the action plan or the wider sort of data strategy in general.
Super. Thank you, Ben. Much appreciated. Appreciate your time. I guess there's plenty of questions coming through, which is great. Just to maybe give people a couple of extra minutes just to look for stuff, and post those in the Q&A function, just to let you know of upcoming training or webinars that we've got coming up. So we've got one. We tend to have these every sort of couple of weeks, but actually these two are coming very very close to each other. But one around net zero standards, one around getting that whole buy-in piece. I will put into the chat a bit later on the link, but you can see it on there actually, mobilityways.com/training. It's got all the details that you might need and the option to sign up. Okay, so moving on. I mean, I'm looking through, so there's got really, really good questions here about systems, standards, and then into sort of buy-in, I guess. But I guess 3 months into this plan, having been delivered, Ben, timelines, a transport data marketplace, when are you envisaging that would be there in some shape or form? Obviously, there's going to be continual improvement and evolution of that, but almost version one, what are we kind of thinking about in terms of that? I guess also with this whole convening piece, I'm really interested about, how that's going to happen. If I river jump into, say, sort of bus and the bus center of excellence as an entity, is there going to be something similar here around data sharing? Are we talking about an expert working group? Yeah, just and very mindful of you're 3 months into a plan, but yeah, is there anything further you can kind of expand on that piece to start with?
Yes. So I mean, timelines in more general. One of the annexes in the action plan sets out specifically for each action and commitment what the timeline is going to be, and our expectation for when that's going to be achieved. We're expecting that the plan is in the next sort of 3 to 4 years is the time scale for when the whole plan will be delivered. I can't give sort of specific answers, particularly on transport data marketplace, given that there's a huge amount of research currently going into what that could look like, and I think a lot of different options are currently on the table for what that might look like. I think the National Data Library has done a really good first sort of example of what that could look like as a sort of first product, but that work's going to be ongoing, and I can't sort of speak to a sort of specific timeline for it. In terms of engagement, that's definitely something that's going to be happening a lot sooner. So we've just had a new member of staff join our team who's focused solely on engagement and thinking about how we're going to engage more with the sector, how we are going to provide people with updates about how the plan is going about, and how we sort of disseminate more of that guidance and information piece. So again, I have no sort of nothing that I can point to right now to say yes, we're going to look out for next week for the first one of these groups. But I think there's definitely going to be a lot more engagement, specifically in the next 2 to 3 months, that I would advise everyone looks out for.
And just a little bit more on that, in terms of, say, the 70 or so transport authorities that currently exist, across mayoral strategic authorities, county combines, etc. Is it going to be something that you will be going to these authorities to say this is what we want, or do you need people to email you and say we want to get involved? Probably a little bit of a combination of both, but yeah, what do you need right now?
It's definitely both. We're definitely interested in as many people getting in contact with us and asking us your questions and concerns. We want to know as much as possible, but the plan, I think, is quite ambitious in setting out how we want to be the sort of the convening function for wider good practice in the system. And I think while we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, I think convening lots of transport authorities and other groups who are interested in this is going to be a key part of delivering the plan. And I think it's definitely not going to be something in which we're relying on everyone to look out for things and to keep in check. We definitely want to go to everyone else and say, look, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're getting on.
Fine, thanks, Ben. Right, so I'm sifting through the questions, and we should be able to get to all of them, which is fab. So there is one. It's building on that sort of work in progress in terms of the system, but what systems are being considered? It says are used to hold the data. I guess it's being considered to hold the data. Are you saying that data library is going to be sort of, if you like, a sort of a proxy? Within that, how much resource in people is needed to manage and make use of it? Have we kind of been thinking about, that aspect of it? It's going to be quite. Is it going to be resource heavy, or how are we thinking about that piece?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. In terms of systems to hold data, that's not something that we're going to sort of prescribe. We want to set out best practice as much as possible, which leads on to things like our sort of request for APIs to be a standard, or at least an encouraged way of sharing data. Obviously, in order to work with APIs, you need your data shared in something that's more advanced than, say, an Excel document sitting on someone's computer. So there's there are more there's more that we want to do in terms of sort of guiding teams as to how to implement some of these priorities. We have a data engineering team within DfT that does really, really good practice in terms of building really good sort of data pipelines, and we want to really draw on that team to set out some of the best practice about how this could be used within your own organizations. But the hope is that if we set out really good examples of what best practice is, then that makes that task a lot less scary and a lot less difficult to do. And that also feeds in then to the sort of the skills and resourcing issue as well. I think we make it pretty clear in the plan that we want to encourage growth of data skills and more people able to use data as part of their sort of regular job, while also we're under no illusions that that's often very challenging for smaller organizations. That's why we want to try to do as much of that convening work and that sort of guidance work of setting out, okay, we can try and provide as much information as possible so people know what what sort of the expectations are, and how to do as much as they can themselves, and then setting up the sort of the structures by which people can learn from other organisations and can learn how to do things better. Um, Aware that that's not an answer to how much resource specifically in people is needed, but definitely more interest in skills and data skills, I think, is definitely a priority of the plan.
And I think, getting that collaboration going kind of then lessens the resource, and it's good to hear there's the data engineering and expert resource at a central level that can guide and support. So, yeah, fantastic. In terms of then beyond the system, I'm trying to do this in kind of a slightly, rational order. Well, as my brain is working anyway, in this heat. So sources, I guess there's a question here. So we've got systems and existing data sources. Question here from Owen. Thank you, Owen. Are there existing data sources that should inform transport planning, but license currently restricts use? So I guess another part of this is you also, I guess, seeking input from across the regions in terms of what data sets are you using and which ones are being paid for and which are not, I guess, is going to be a critical piece to kind of understand the commercialities of that. I guess within data sources, I'm also thinking about, is mobile data going to be part of this set? Obviously that's something at this point in time which is used by quite a few areas in terms of better understanding it at an anonymous basis where people are going from, to and from. Yeah, so just thoughts around sort of data set sources would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really good question, and it's something that came up loads and loads of times when we were researching the DAP. We heard sort of multiple times that people sort of even authorities who were sort of collecting data, but then didn't actually own the data that they were collecting because it was being collected by a third party, or um, or there were sort of licensing agreements, which means they couldn't access things. We're aware that this is a really, really, really huge problem, and I think we're trying to encourage much awareness as possible of why it's really important that you keep your own data, why you keep access to your data, and why you're able to share it, because there are definitely data sources out there that we could use to inform transport planning, but we don't currently have access to, and it's a huge frustration. The way that we're attacking this is, I think, through different parts of the action plan. So I think all of the parts of the plan that are encouraging sort of a really good, um, uh, sort of encouraging sort of more positivity about data use and sort of the importance of data, we hope will influence sort of senior decision makers within organizations to treat that really really importantly, and make sure that they keep it when it comes to sort of procurement projects and that sort of thing. We're also looking into what are the different levers that are available to us and different levers that are available to local authorities in terms of making sure that you have access to data as part of the procurement decisions that you make. So looking into all of these different options, but really, really aware that it's one of the big challenges that we're trying to address. You also had a question about mobile data. I can't speak to that in a huge amount of detail. As far as from our side, the more data that we can use, share, access, the better. Obviously, where you know super relevant to mobile data is the action around making sure that the theme, sorry, around making sure that we're thinking ethically, legally about how we use data, and with special concerns to privacy and data minimization principles for things like that. But there's definitely a way of using some of these data sets that to still inform policy decisions that don't conflict with accessing some of this data in a really sort of ethical way.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about mobile data, but actually, thank you for your question as well, or thoughts. Expanding that in terms of, is DfT seeking to compel mobile phone companies to provide that open source data? on an anonymized basis, on the basis that people are purchasing data sets at the minute. I guess there's an opportunity to kind of, from a scaling and an economies perspective, have it sat somewhere where, and it relates to another question from Oliver. Thank you, Oliver. In terms of, the marketplace being something that potentially has also a paywall element to it. There might be a common data set or a data set which is available for free, but then there might be elements of it that could sit behind a paywall. Is that something that's in the thinking?
Good question. I don't know is the simple answer. We It's really early days in terms of the transport data marketplace. We have a sort of forerunner to the transport data marketplace idea, which is of course the rail data marketplace, which is we're not building directly on it. It's a very separate project. But the transport data marketplace, we're definitely looking into all different options as to what access could look like. I think that access to the marketplace sitting behind a paywall, this is just my personal opinion, I think would probably be quite against the sort of the goal of an open data marketplace. We want to encourage access. We want to encourage as many people to post um, uh, post their data sets to this marketplace and for it to be accessed by as many people as possible. I did see the other sort of consideration though is security, and I did see another question around
Going to go into that one next. Yeah,
yeah,
perfect.
around data security. We need to take this really, really seriously as well. And that's very much the balance that we face with any sort of open data set, is making sure that we're keeping things as open as possible, but not so open that we could be exposing sort of national critical infrastructure and that sort of thing. How we get that balance right is going to be a key bit of thinking as the transport data marketplace project continues. And I'm sure I'll be able to give you much more of an update on that in a few months' time. But yeah, the security issue is definitely something that we're taking very, very, very seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that's something as an organization ourselves, we process a lot of data on behalf of large organizations. They're the controller, we're the processor. We've got options then around how that data might be shared in an anonymous form. But obviously, that's very specific to organizations, and there is confidentiality and security aspects associated with that. So, more than happy to kind of feed in our thoughts into the thinking around all of that. So that's, yes, we've systems, standards, sources, all S's really, and security. But thinking actually into standards. So we've got a few questions here about standards. What data standards might you be looking at for walking routes, standards for DRT and other flexible public transport modes that, perhaps, don't follow fixed patterns? Um, a question that relates to that as well, at the top of the tree was, do we need to improve our measurement of active travel? Um, I think you mentioned at the start, thinking about all of those modes, all of those component parts of a trip. Very few people have a bus stop or a train stop that's right outside their door. There's an element of active travel that could be walking, that could be cycling, then obviously into public transport, and then further active travel at the end. So, yeah, just thoughts a little bit in terms of standards and measurement.
Yeah, really, really good question. And a really, really interesting topic of which there's quite a lot of thinking going on, particularly by Active Travel England. They're doing a huge amount of thinking into standards in this space. I think that yes, so I know that there's a project underway in Active Travel England to think about what are common standards for walking, wheeling, and cycling routes, and thinking really carefully about how that maps onto a data standards layer that goes underneath it. Yeah, the question that mentioned sort of non-linear routes is a good one, because that's the really big challenge when it comes to walking routes, is that it's a lot more complex and standardization is a lot more difficult. But there's a huge amount of work that's going on in this space. I think it's one of those, it's a case of a really good example where um, teams have identified that there's a gap in standardization and are trying to address it. And I think it's also one of those cases that we're really interested in, because it talks a lot about that integration of standards. we think sort of standards, I think, are actually going to be a really powerful tool in terms of enabling a lot of that integration and sharing of data sets. Because if we sort of say, okay, all your data sets needs to refer to similar things in a similar way, and also need to be set out in a similar way, it makes it so much easier for you to say, okay, right, I'm going to take this data set of, of train stations and integrate it with my data set of, local pavements, and build something much quicker than you having to say, right, I've got this data set here. It's all formatted in a slightly different way. It refers to things slightly differently. I'm going to have to do a gigantic amount of data cleaning before I'm even able to integrate them and use them more effectively. So yes, it's something that we're doing a huge amount of thinking about, and particularly on the active travel bit. Why it's so interesting is because it touches on so many of these other different modes of transport as well. If you think about almost any journey you take, almost every journey is multimodal, and almost every journey includes that walking or wheeling element to begin it. Unless you're literally getting a sort of a taxi directly from outside your house, there's almost always some sort of active travel element to any part of a multimodal journey. So getting that right is so critical to the ideas of better connected and integrating these different travel systems, and making people able to plan their journeys more effectively. So it's something that I'm really interested in, really passionate about, and I think has a lot of potential to improve the way that we do data sharing in a good way. I'm also really interested in data standards as a sort of a tool for encouraging good data quality and good data practices more generally. I don't think that's something that we're looking at doing in terms of mandating at all. I don't think that's probably not on the table. But I think the more that we can encourage good data standards practice, a lot of the sort of other impacts we want to have as a result of the data action plan will flow from that.
Yeah, thank you, man. I mean, something that was floating through my mind as certainly at the start of your thing. I mean, I was thinking about transport in its widest sense and the whole sort of build it and they will come. The time tends to be kind of where we've been with transport, build it and they will come. And then, we're either pleased or we're not in terms of the level of use of it. Um, and I guess something that I also picked up is kind of, we need to give people the information they need. I and there's a couple of questions, a couple of sort of responses in the Q&A stuff which allude to this kind of piece, which is, I think, how do we help people realize they need to explore their choices? Somebody who's car dependent is not going to be looking for journeys, for ways that they can travel any other way. So there's almost a part there I'm thinking at the start is like, how do we actually get people into the mindset of exploring their options and them being, I hope, through what the work that's coming through, incredibly encouraged that they've got all these different options that have not been exploring to this day. There's a question here from Jemima. Thank you, Jemima. How will the plan help gather data on what journeys people would like to make but can't because of the barriers? Now, the barrier might be I use my car and therefore I'm completely closed off to other options. So, yeah, I'm just interested in kind of your thoughts around all of that.
Yeah, I mean, a really good set of questions, and particularly that question about so the plan is not going to sort of directly gather data on what journeys people would like to make, but I know that we did a huge amount of research into what the barriers were ahead of writing it. And I know that there's a huge amount of social research work that goes on within the departments that goes into a lot of these questions. So it's a fascinating one, and I'd be really interested to hear what others had to say on that one. I think the idea of the sort of the build it and they will come approach is definitely something that we are really sort of committed to in terms of the data situation. So, the idea is that if you create more access to different data sets that are available, it enables that resource that others can use to build things to give people these choices, and to maybe nudge is the wrong word, but to sort of provide people with access to lots of different ways of traveling. The main example I'm sort of thinking of is TfL's approach to open data has been sort of really impressive, making a huge amount of their data sets really readily available to people. That then allowed others to build apps like Citymapper on top of the data architecture that the TfL had built, And then through apps like that, they provide people with access to more different versions of transport. I mean, however, I'm sure lots of people will have had an experience of sort of using, the Google Maps route planner or Citymapper or one of those apps to sort of say, okay, just what's my fastest way of getting this? Oh, I hadn't realized that actually I could get this bus or this tram or whatever. I think that's the flow chart of the approach that we're hoping to take through the plan. Make all the data available. That enables people to build, the interesting apps on top of it that will then give people more choice, more ability to plan their journeys in detail, and more access to the information that they actually need. And then hopefully that will then lead to people being able to more easily assess, oh, actually, do I need to be driving this route every time? It might be cheaper for me. It might be easier for me to take a different route. But yeah, super interesting reflection, I think, because it's something that's difficult when writing a strategy like this, where we're really trying to set that base level and then hoping that all of the different pieces will fall into place.
And this is why it's an exciting time in terms of everybody's got a part to play in this. I mean, if I think about some of the stuff we do, we deliver hundreds of thousands of personalized travel plans each year to employees of large organizations. We get fantastic feedback. I didn't know I had these choices. I didn't know that there was something I could use. So that's a starting point. We've got to get to that place. I think also there's a lot of information out there around intent that we can build into this marketplace. For example, we run LiftShare, biggest carpooling platform in the year, have done in the country, have done for 25 years. We've got inordinate amounts of data on intent. That intent, I want to go from A to B. That intent is rarely realized because obviously, even with 700,000 users on our platform, the likelihood of matching, certainly for irregular trips, is quite low. But we've got all that data. Now, if we were to able to put that into a marketplace, clever people could start to look at it, dovetail it with other bits of information, that whole part of what local transport plans and what we need from an integrated transport strategy starts to come into play. We've got people now can start to really sort of see choices. So I'm really excited about, this as a framework going forwards. I guess just flicking through, just trying to see, we've got a few more minutes left. Um, I think there's a few questions around transport planning, applications beyond a data marketplace, applications beyond in terms of business casing. Think about the mass transit working group that's being kind of set up and the business cases and living where I do in Leeds, the challenges around the mass transit system there. As part of that is about the business case. Part of that is about actually kind of, the formation of plans. How do you see all of that kind of fitting in as well in terms of how it can grow arms and legs, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, this is always one of those strategies where you have to be careful about the scope. Otherwise, you end up trying to solve all the problems of the entire transport system in one go. I think I think the bits of the strategy that are around prioritizing data in terms of people's minds, in terms of senior decision makers, about taking things seriously, I think is a key part of this. I think basically what we want to provide with the action plan is fuel for the business cases that people may want to put together for, okay, we're thinking about involving a different data set in our delivery of this particular issue. But I don't really know how to make the case for why it might be important, or how are we able to sort of make this business case for using data more effectively in this particular way. Okay, well, we're able to provide the sort of the strategic direction of saying, oh no, this is actually a really important thing that DfT really cares about. We're able to provide the sort of the prioritization of okay, improve how the sector sort of sees data and make sure that lots of senior decision makers are taking it as seriously as we are. And then also the hope that sort of that engagement piece and that information sharing and guidance will then also provide people with the tools that they need in order to sort of really strongly make the case to say, yeah, and we think that collecting this data set or using this data set to build this thing is going to be a really core part of our plans. So that's how we think. I think it would fit into those sort of, I want to say bigger picture, but a sort of bigger delivery plans is hopefully sort of providing the evidence that people can use as for making those sorts of decisions.
Yeah, I mean, transport planning, travel planning, obviously authorities have got spatial development strategies to write at the minute. So I guess, part of that is having the right data. Um, you know, you touched on growth, such an important metric, and transport as a lever for economic growth. And I think that's again really important in terms of what we're thinking about in inward investment, the placement of places. I did see a question around how can we use some of this data. So I think obviously it's a bit of a moving feast, but I think, the stakes in the ground, as it were, the foundations are being laid. To finish off, I guess to give you that opportunity, Ben, the next 3 months, let's say, admittedly it's across the summer. Hopefully it's not as hot as today, but no, let's see where we go to. But in terms of what specifics do you need from people? I mean, we've outlined it today. Obviously, you did have on a slide, get in contact. Who are you wanting and hoping to hear from? Who are the people, particularly within this audience that we've got today? What's the next sort of 3 to 6 months look like in terms of activities?
Yeah, I mean, really good question. I think, well, we want to hear from as many people as possible. I think we want to make sure that we're getting as much of our of what we're delivering right. The next 3 months really looks like a lot of the discovery and research into a lot of these core things that we're trying to deliver. Things like the Transport Data Action Plan, things like the Transport Data Marketplace, things like our approach to data standards. They're all currently in this what could it look like phase. And I think very quickly in the next 3 months, we're going into, okay, we've got a couple of ideas that we want to test with people. I think we're going to look definitely at how we can engage with people more and create some of these venues for people to talk about some of these issues. But what's I think really important for us is that we start testing these ideas with as many people as possible, with people who are far more expert than us about the realities of how this works, people in the audience today. So I think in the next 3 months, it's going to be a case of us creating some of those venues that we can have some more of these discussions like we've had today, um, testing as many of these ideas with people as possible, and trying to push them closer towards something that's going to be actually useful and effective for everyone. Because there's no point in us building a load of stuff that we think, oh yeah, this looks really cool and shiny, but actually no one can use, no one is, it doesn't solve particular problems for people in the audience. So I would encourage everyone to get in touch with us. We're keen to speak to as many people as possible about this. I'm happy to come and talk to you and your teams more directly about the action plan and what we're doing. But I would say to everyone, look out over the next 3 months, because we're really going to ramp up how much we want to be talking and testing these ideas with everyone. So, yes, definitely look out for that.
Fabulous. Thanks, Ben. So you've got obviously there's a website. Is there a newsletter or some kind of element to that where people can sign up and start to get information, or is that something to come?
Not at the moment, but I'd be very surprised if that isn't part of our engagement as part of this.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, we've hit virtually the hour. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everybody. We'll call it a day there. Have a
Brilliant.
good
Thank you.
day. Bye bye.